So what did you just do? You've created a character with this limited game, but there's also opportunities to create characters on a much deeper level, which I'm about to show you right here, where you can not only adjust their physical traits down to even the length of the bridge of their nose or the presence of jowls or not. You can cycle between gender even. You can choose whether you want them to be a sly negotiator or more skill-based player or extremely strong. These all play into what G calls the identity principle. Learning involves taking on and playing with identities in such a way that the learner has real choices in developing the virtual identity and ample opportunity to mediate on the relationship between new identities and old ones. There is a tripartite play of identities as learners relate and reflect on their multiple real-world identities, a virtual identity, and a projective identity. First, there is a virtual identity. One's identity as a virtual character in the virtual world of the game itself. A second identity that is at stake in playing a game like Fallout 4 is a real-world identity, namely my own identity as Brian DeLoach, a non-virtual person playing a computer game. Many parts make up this identity, such as teacher, angler, student, weightlifter, and husband, but they are identities expressed through the context of the game. These identities become relevant only as they affect and are filtered through my identity as a video game player playing Fallout 4. And indeed, any one of my real-world identities can be so engaged whenever I'm playing this game. For example, my identity as a powerlifter of many years affects the way I approach obstacles in the game and how I assign skill points. Where another player may initially search for a key to a door or cast a spell that transforms them into a mist to pass through, my first impulse is to try and bash that shit with a rock until it opens. In fantasy RPGs, where skill trees allow players to assign points towards skills and traits, things like dexterity, magic, or even health points have always taken a back seat to strength for my characters. According to G, a third identity at stake is called the projective identity. Projective identity, playing on two senses of the words project, meaning both to project one's values and desires onto the virtual character, this character I'm in the process of creating in front of you, for example, and seeing the virtual character as one's own project in the making, a being whom I infuse with a certain trajectory through time defined by my aspirations for what I want that character to be and become. This is the hardest identity for G to describe in his book, but it is also the most important one for understanding the power of games like Fallout 4. I will represent this identity as Brian DeLoach as Jim from Fallout 4. The triple play of identities, a virtual identity, a real-world identity, and a projective identity in the relationship player as virtual character is quite powerful. It transcends identification with characters in novels or movies, for instance, because it is both active, in that the player actively does things, and reflexive, in the sense that once the player has made some choices about the virtual character is now developed in a way that sets certain parameters about what the player can do. The virtual character redounds back on the player and affects his or her future actions. In his own words, the theme of G's book is that good video games reflect good principles of learning. Now, I want to discuss how and why the sort of play with identities at work in Fallout 4 is relevant to learning outside video games. A game like Fallout 4 is powerfully caught up with playing with identities. However, all deep learning, that is active, critical learning, is inextricably caught up with identity in a variety of different ways. People cannot learn in a deep way within a semiotic domain if they are not willing to commit themselves fully to the learning in terms of time, effort, and active engagement. Such a commitment requires that they are willing to see themselves in terms of a new identity. That is, to see themselves as the kind of person who can learn, use, and value the new semiotic domain. Let's consider virtual identities. In a good science classroom, a virtual identity is at stake. Learners need to be able to engage in words, interactions, and actions that allow them to take on the identity of a, quote, scientist. But what does that mean? There are many different sciences and types of scientists. The teacher must put into motion in his or her classroom a set of values, beliefs, and ways with words, deeds, and interactions that represent, for the teacher and the students, what it means to be a particular kind of scientist in this classroom. Doing this means taking up a specific viewpoint on a specific branch of science as a set of cognitive and social practices. In a chemistry class, for example, the students are not real scientists and are not going to become real scientists anytime soon. What is being created here is a virtual identity. Student as scientist, just as I am Brian DeLoach as Jim from Fallout 4. There exist strong views about how scientists ought to think, value, and act. In theory, students take on this identity as schema, and it affects how they think, value, and act accordingly and in conjunction with the other two identities. Erikson's psychosocial moratorium is deeply at play here, as it should be in the classroom too. As Ms. Frizzle said, take chances, make mistakes. The limited stakes offered by a virtual identity allows for sometimes reckless experimentation with limited consequences. These projected identities offer a chance for safety and learning. I, for example, enjoy making my character in this game hyper-masculine and will only choose beard and hairstyles for Jim that intentionally upset my wife. I then dump all my skill points into the strength trait with none for skill, accuracy, or health because this is who I want to be in this space. But the game, within the parameters of the psychosocial moratorium, punishes such reckless broism, and Jim is quickly killed by the enemies that prowl the post-apocalyptic wilderness. But, since there are reduced stakes, and death is not eternal in this semiotic realm, my Jim's body is restored to the last checkpoint, where he can try a different approach and possibly a different haircut.